Once again, I extend a heartfelt welcome to Shreya to the Changemaker 20 Summit. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. Shreya, I would like to introduce Shreya a little bit. So, Shreya is the Senior Program Manager at One Future Collective. Her work and value systems revolve around facilitating community care, advancing feminist leadership, and feminist justice. Other thematic areas of their work are gender justice, climate change, and safeguarding prevention and protection against abuse, harm, and violence. They co-lead the One Future Fellowship, wherein they germinate informed South Asian feminist leaders who facilitate transformative change. They employ a survivor-centric, queer affirmative, and intersectional feminist approach to their work. They possess expertise in producing knowledge products, developing tools for facilitation, and customizing learning programs for diverse audiences. So, a personal note to Shreya, I know that Shreya works with One Future Collective, and One Future Collective, at least for people in India and people in the development sector, we've all heard that it's a fantastic organization because, like I mentioned in Shreya's introduction, the organization and the people working there, they focus a lot on how the employees should be at peace. I mean, this is the most crass way of putting it, but for a very the One Future Collective in India is known for a very nice work ethic, work culture, and I'm very glad that a person from One Future Collective is over here with us at the Changemaker 20 Summit, because we definitely need voices like theirs over here. So, welcome, Shreya. Yes, the floor is yours.
Kind introduction, Alisha. Also, hello everyone. I am Shreya. My pronouns are she, her. As Alisha has shared, I am a senior program manager at One Future Collective, and I'm very happy to be facilitating the session on feminist leadership. How do we go from theory to practice? As we begin, I also want you to know what to expect from this session. Originally, we were going to make it a little more participatory approach, but given that there are a little glitches, we will be changing it into seeing how do we situate all of these things in theory, but also with examples of how this has happened in real life. So we will begin with some concepts integral to unpack, like power, oppression, intersectionality, and then go on to trace the history of leadership in itself to situate different kinds of leaderships that exists. We will do this through the lens of power, gender, and intersectionality. And then we move on to speaking about more on feminist movements to further contextualize this within feminist leadership, and of course to navigate what are the different principles that come in and what does it look like when we say feminist leadership in the social justice sector. I do want to speak a little on OFC, that is One Future Collective. We exist to further social justice in India and globally. We are a feminist social purpose organization. Our vision is of a world that's built on social justice, yes, and at the same time also led by communities of care. We work with and for people and communities surviving systemic oppression and fight for the right of each person to live a life of safety, dignity, and belongingness. So, our mission is fight for the right of each person to live a life of safety, dignity, and belongingness by leading research and advocacy, building just institutions, and also enabling leadership communities. I know Alicia has already given a very kind profile of what is the kind of work that I do here. I also co lead the One Future Fellowship, wherein we germinate informed South Asian feminist leaders from the knowledge and expertise we have here based in South Asia to the world as a model of facilitating transformative change. I want to begin my session by this quote by Margaret Mead, wherein they said, "Never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that ever has." While I will not attempt to redefine what social justice looks like, and no one definition exists, right? We will use our section here to introduce you to understanding what social justice means and how this also guides our work. So, theorists and writers in the realm of justice, right from John Rawls to Amartya Sen, Iris Young, Bell Hooks, Paulo Freire to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, everyone has spoken about social justice within their work. Educators, non-profit organizations, communities have practiced social justice in various ways and foregrounds in their work. So it is this interplay of theory and practice that One Future Collective is concerned with. And additionally, intersectional feminism provides us a pathway to understand how social justice or social injustice occurs, interests, and compounds and reinstates the power of working in a holistic manner to address it. If I have to say what is happening right now, well, the world is facing a crisis. The current structures of our world foster and promote attitudes, behaviors, systems which do not really value, devalue, and deprioritize, say, mental health and well-being, breed interpersonal violence, reward unhealthy competition over collaboration, and promote a lack of care towards others. These are the structures and beliefs embedded in our current and future generations that we need to urgently dismantle. The world is also facing a crisis of leadership. It requires nurturing of intersectional feminist leaders towards radically shifting structures that our world is currently built upon, while we also try to rebuild more just and equitable communities. For example, the One Future Fellowship is our way of germinating such leaderships in different pockets of the world, as I've mentioned. But before I share more details, if anyone is interested, I do want to begin with important concepts we need to unpack before we speak of social justice or feminist leadership. When we say leadership, leadership is first and foremost about power. It is about holding power, exercising power, changing the distribution and relations of power in multiple forms and settings. Feminist leadership means functioning with a greater consciousness, not only of others, but also of one's own power. Intentionally moving away from how leadership and power have intersected in the mainstream organizational structures and from feminists' ambivalent historical relationship with power. The most overriding goal of feminist leadership is not creating well managed organizations that maintain the social status quo, but it's about working to transform the relations of power in society and to create alternative models of power within their own structures. I know I've been mentioning power quite a bit, and I do want to emphasize a little bit here on what are the different expressions of power identified by Myler and Wellickson. So, power over would be, say, a more direct positional form of power, as evident in the name itself, power over. This power asserts domination or force or coercion. It's the most traditional form of power, and in the absence of other models, this has also been replicated in personal relationships too. I'll give an example here. A management officer at an IT firm organizes a firm wide meeting, and in the course of the meeting, they would actively interrupt the newly hired interns while they speak about their concerns. So the manager goes on to invalidate their concerns by asking the interns to develop, say, adaptive listening strategies. This is what power over can look like. There's also power with. This form of power is about creating solidarity and building collective strength through mutual support systems and safety nets. The intention of this power is to reduce social conflict and to promote equitable relations. Say a bunch of interns come together, mobilize a couple of people from senior management to address their concerns, and also hold the management officer responsible and accountable for using their power adversely. There's also power too. This concept refers to the agency and capacity among people to shape their lives and the world around them. So it recognizes our intrinsic power and opens possibilities of joint power. Someone from the senior management spearheads the process of creating a committee to address concerns of these new hires and to create initiatives that establish safe spaces in the workplace where employees can voice their concerns without being embarrassed. Then there is also power within. This form of power that relates to intrinsic power calls on qualities one may possess, like knowledge, influence, their resources like networks and relationships. While this power exists within oneself, it can also be nurtured and built. So, say after a year of working in communications, XYZ realized that they have the skills and passion to work in a more advocacy oriented role. So, after taking up a few courses to formalize their learning, the ability or the space to go and approach their team lead with a request for a more advocacy intensive role. And of course, the last one is power with or power within. These are the different kinds of power that have been already spoken about in terms of expressions of power. I'll also give an example for power under, the most complex, prevalent form of power. It attempts to understand why people who have experienced any kind of harm, abuse, trauma, violence, oppression, when they gain power, they may also often become abusive and oppressive themselves. An experience here you could read upon more is the Zanzibar experience in itself. While we speak of power, I also want to speak a little bit on privilege and oppression. I think we may be a little acquainted with how privilege refers to the often inherent and sometimes maybe intentional access to resources, opportunities, the entitlement that results in advantages for certain social groups and disadvantages for other social groups. Privilege is characteristically invisible to people who may have it. So, people in dominant groups may often believe that they have earned the privileges that they enjoy, or everyone could have access to these privileges only if you work hard enough to do so. So, you have to earn it. In fact, privileges are unearned and they are granted to people in dominant groups whether they want it or no, whether they exercise it or no, regardless of their stated intent. Unlike targets of oppression, people in dominant groups are frequently unaware are members of the dominant group due to the privilege of being able to see themselves as persons rather than stereotypes. So, for example, in India, dominant groups could include cisgendered heterosexual men, savarnas, and people from higher castes who are also able bodied, upper and middle low class people, and perhaps even English and Hindi speaking populations. The feminist and anti racism activist Peggy McIntosh had defined it as this: power exists when one group has something of value that is denied to others simply because of the groups they belong to, rather than because of anything they've done or failed to do so. So, access to privilege doesn't determine one's outcomes, but it is definitely an asset that makes it more likely than whatever talent, ability, and aspirations a person with privilege has will result in something positive for them. To understand how power and privilege work, we may also need to first understand what a social group looks like. A social group refers to any collective of people who will share a range of physical, cultural, social, and or even economic characteristics within one social identity categories. So social identity categories could include gender, sexual orientation, class, caste, physical development or psychological abilities, race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, age, geographical location, and many other identities. There are different kinds of groups again, dominant groups and oppressed groups. The dominant group would be someone who is an active oppressor or is oppressing without even realizing, because they do have that privilege, and these are advantaged groups. And the vice versa for those who are members of an oppressed group. Determining who has privilege and who does not is complex because of a myriad of socio-cultural, historical, generational factors that operate intersectionality to shape one's experiences. And this also affects their access to resources and opportunities across social and political realms, including at work, home, and also professional interpersonal relations. So, oppression would refer to, say, prolonged unjust treatment due to the intentional or unintentional exercise of power by dominant social groups against oppressed groups on the individual, institution, socio-cultural, and ideological level. Now, in any leadership or decision making situation, the complexities of power often merges with the dynamics of intersectionality as well. Intersectionality has now grown to become one of the most fundamental principles of feminism, right? The concept was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it is a framework that looks at multiple intersections of systems of oppression. But before Kimberly's use of the term, in the context of black feminism, intersectionality was used to study experiences of students from multiple marginalized identities by Robbins and Quay in 2014. Scholars and activists have now developed many ways of looking at intersections of not only gender and race, but also class, caste, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ableism, and many other forms of oppression. So, through understanding intersectionality, we want to recognize that identities do not grant us power or privilege exclusively, because identities can privilege or oppress us in different situations or during interactions with different kinds of individuals as well. Our identities are all interlinked, and while we may derive power from some identities, we may also face oppression due to other identities. All oppression we face is interlinked and compounds owing to different identities. Intersectionality will also recognize that identities do not grant you power or privilege exclusively, and at the same time, to look at power and privilege in a way where we have space to reflect on it by ourselves. Sorry, did my video just go off? Alright, thank you. To better understand intersectionality, perhaps we can examine this quote by Audre Lorde, which said, "As a 49-year-old black lesbian feminist socialist mother of two, including one boy and a member of interracial couple, I usually find myself a part of some group defined or other, deviant, inferior, or just plain wrong." In order to understand Lord's experience, we can't just apply a strictly anti racist or anti homo negative or gender equality perspective. Their identities don't stand alone, nor do ours. Now that we have looked upon some important concepts, I do want to speak about leadership and also do it while defining what feminism means. For a lot of people, feminism today stands not only for gender equality, but also for the transformation of these social relations of power that oppress, exploit, marginalize any set of people on the basis of their identities like gender, age, sexual orientation, ability, caste, class, race, nationality, and more. It also recognizes the intersecting nature of people's identities and social locations, and the fact that we experience discrimination, exclusion, oppression in intersecting and simultaneous ways. So, feminism no longer seeks simplistic parity between the sexes, but a more profound transformation that accepts multiple gender identities and creates gender equality in a newly social order. This is what feminism looks like when we look at it through an ideological perspective. It is also an analytic framework. Feminism has transformed the concepts of patriarchy, the social order of male rights and privileges, and gender, socially constructed relations of power between men, women, and all other queer identities. It has created a range of analytical tools and methods for unpacking the power imbalances between men, women, and queer folks in various social institutions. When I say various social institutions, I do mean personal, professional, political, and interpersonal relations, including public relations. This could also mean gendered division of labor in the household and economic activities, control of women's sexuality and reproductive life, and more. Feminism is also a social change strategy So it prioritizes the empowerment of all marginalized genders, the transformation of gender power relations, and the advancement of gender equity within all change interventions. So, feminism believes that change that does not advance the status and rights of women and queer folks, how can it really be any kind of social change? So, feminism views all change interventions through a gender lens as well, whether gender equity, women's rights, queer rights are being consciously addressed and advanced by these change processes. In daily life, feminist practices is concerned with the daily practice of power, privilege, oppression, intersectionality. And isn't this so true with our own personal relationships and organizational movements and cultural movements all of us here are a part of creating? When I say this is what feminism looks like, I also want to speak a little bit on the history of leadership throughout feminist movements. So leadership is usually defined as the ability and or action to lead a group of people or an organization. The history of the world has encountered many forms of leadership. Historical studies, narratives have mainly focused on characteristics, personality traits, behaviors of leadership. So, narratives on traditional forms of leadership have been greatly influenced by these different kinds of theories which have come in when we speak about the history of feminist movements. I do want to cite that this is from Shauna Wakefield's work, From Transformative and Feminist Leadership for Women's Rights. What began in the 19th century as the great man theory is this idea of leadership that persists. History can be largely explained by the impact of heroes or great men. It is an assertion that certain individuals, certain men, are gifts from God placed on earth to provide the light needed to uplift human existence. So it centers on the assumption that great leadership skills, these traits, are innate, and great leaders can arise in the time of great crisis. So, the great man theory has been critiqued by sociologists like Herbert Spencer, who recognized this is somewhat childish, primitive, and also perhaps unscientific. Regardless of such critiques, the theory, the great man theory, remained predominant until mid 20th century for understanding what leadership looks like. In fact, this is where I would welcome all of you to reflect upon thinking if you have seen any kind of great man theory still existing in your society or community. Followed in the early 1900s, the trait theory walks in as an extension of the great man theory we spoke about, in assuming that leaders are born with traits that make them more suitable for the role of their leader than others who lack these natural born traits. As such, the theory pinpoints certain qualities like intelligence, accountability, sense of responsibility, creativity, among others, that lets an individual excel at leadership. It explicitly focuses on the traits of the leaders and ignores the followers or people who are a part of the community, since the leader and their traits are central to the success of the group. This is where we speak of power and gender relations as well. The more a person has masculine traits, the more they are naturally born to be a leader. And remember, historically, predominantly in societies, it would be a cisgendered men who would come forward and say, oh, I am a leader. So, how am I a good leader? If I have the traits of being masculine, that is, I am someone who's aggressive. I speak when I want to. I may also interrupt over others, but it is because I have something to teach here. I am creative in my own senses. This is where I will also encourage you to go back to the different expressions of power we spoke. Is this power over or power with? Power over and gender relations here, all of these dynamics have always shown up in leadership theories. The next is the contingency theory of leadership. This happened between 1960s to 1980s, which believes that no one way or style of leadership can be applicable to all situations. The elimination of the trait theory led researchers to recognize that there might be variables like relationship with a group or community members, the task structures, the definitions, and the leader's positions of power in influencing any kind of particular situation. A leader must choose the right course of action, taking accountability into all of these variables. This is what the contingency theory spoke of. And just like contingency theory, there was also situational theory, which stressed on the importance of situational variables that don't consider anyone's leadership style to be better than others. Then came the servant leadership in 1970s. It is a more recent theory of leadership that argues that most effective leaders are supposed to be the servants of their people. So, servant leaders get results for their organization through wholehearted attention to their followers and followers' needs. Unlike many approaches to leadership, which offer suggestions on how top level leaders can influence, motivate those further down the hierarchy. So, servant leadership puts its emphasis on collaboration, trust, empathy, ethics. The leader should be a servant first, leading from a desire to better serve others and not attain more power. We may have heard of we are for the people, by the people, from the people. So, for the people becomes important here. Then came transactional leadership. It was first described by Max Weber in 1947 and then by Bernard Vaz in 1981. This style is most often used by managers. It focuses on the basic management processes of controlling, organizing, short term planning. Famous examples of leaders who have used this also include McCarthy and de Gaulle. Transactional leadership involves motivating and also directing followers or members of the community primarily through appealing through their own self interest. So, the power of transactional leaders comes from their formal authority and responsibility in the organization. The main goal of the community member, of the follower, the participant, is to just obey the instructions of the leader. This style can be also mentioned something as a telling style. I tell you what to do. And then came transformational leadership theory. In the late 1970s, studies on leadership moved towards the relationship between the leaders and the community members in the context of leadership. So, James Burns introduced the transformational leadership theory, also known as relationship theories. Burns defined this theory as an idealized influence that inspires the participant, community member, followers' loyalty, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation through individualized consideration. The research done on transformative leadership looks at how this model is an ongoing collaborative process that talks about the kind of leader who is inspirational, charismatic, encourages everyone to transform and become better at a task. Mentoring also becomes a significant part of this relationship or leadership process. Now, Shauna Wakefield, who I mentioned, a gender and social justice advocate, they've argued that research on leadership has mainly focused on leadership in corporations and politics. Not much work has been done in the area of social justice within both formal and informal political processes, including feminist organizations. So, around the late 1970s, hypotheses on women leadership or leadership in feminist movements were being developed, and the focus was on the differentiation between men and women leadership. So, it was observed that women were more less hierarchical, more cooperative, more collaborative, more oriented to enhancing others' self worth. So, women leadership would correspond to transformational leaders because of women's stereotypical roles like nurturance, interpersonal bonding. And most bodies of work have not gone beyond analyzing values and attitudes of women leaders as emphasis was on the tracking progression of what it means when we say a men's leadership style. I do want to emphasize that this isn't binary, but we also may know that there is nothing called as the binary. So, what does it mean for us when we want to look at leadership in a way where it is not binary in sense of these are masculine traits and feminine traits, mix them together and we may have something. What about queer leaders then? Just a reflection question for all of us. During the second wave of feminist movements in 1970s, the word leadership had negative connotations attached towards it. So the word leadership was associated more with hierarchy, seen as inextricably linked to patriarchal domination of women. We know that now there have been changes, but even within leadership, there have been different kinds of leadership styles. So Kurt Lewin was the father of experimental social psychology, and he developed the equation that behavior is a function of a person's character plus their environment. Whereas behavioral psychologists held the stance that behaviors arise as a response to conditioning. Social psychologists recognize the way that perception of various social situations would affect behavior. So, Lewin worked on a few leadership experiments in the United States together with Ronald Lippitt and Ralph White. And the experiments took place in 1938 and 1939, which involved 10-year-old children being studied in different settings. So, groups of children were led with different philosophies of leadership. And the conclusions were that autocratic leadership resulted in aggressive behaviors in groups. Groups led by an autocratic leader showed highest productivity, 70%, but it also dropped to 29% when the autocratic leader left the room. Democratically led groups would show productivity of 50%, but they would only drop very little to say 46% in the absence of a democratic leader. And laissez faire leadership performer, it turned out to be a productivity rate of only 33%. This is what it means when we say there are different kinds of leadership styles as well, right? When we say autocratic leadership, it's focused on the leader. Advantages could be it could be very quick because there is no consultation with the team. It improves performance in certain situations. There is less stress in certain circumstances if the leader is shouldering over all responsibilities. But the disadvantages also mean there is frustration, there is fear. It's a paralyzed organization because no leader equates to no decisions being made. No new opportunities have come, they're being missed, there is a communication breakdown. Then there is democratic leadership, which would build on empowering team members to participate in decision making with a strive towards consensus. It provides advantages of increased creativity, innovation, collaboration. And the backside is also that leadership brings perhaps some kind of, if I could say, weakness in productivity, because people would tend to count things like, oh, is it time consuming? It does not work well if someone doesn't have that kind of expertise right now. And the last one being laissez faire leadership. It's a hands off leadership style where team members are free to make all decisions. So it leads to a lot of times a disengaged leader. But on the upside, it also requires a highly skilled, experienced team who can do great work while making all decisions by themselves. I want to now speak about transformational leadership, wherein transformational leaders practice a style of leadership that inspires some kind of positive change in both employees who work for them, under them, and the organization as a whole. So, equal parts of visionary, mentoring, being there for accountability, inspiration, these leaders create a culture of innovation and positive change that can also lead to successful outcomes for the organization and the leader, and of course, the members as well, right? The concept of transformational leadership started with James V. Downtown in 1973 and was expanded by James Burns in 1978. While we speak about this, let's directly look at the different kinds of transformative leadership elements that come in. This can be called as the four I's. This is taken from the Michigan State University online citation. One is idealized stimulation. So transformational leaders, they would question the this is the way we've always been doing things. How do we change it? Can we question this mentally, taking on the status quo, challenging assumptions of even veteran leaders? They encourage the same mindset in their employees. This means emphasizing new experiences, new opportunities, innovative ways of thinking. And then there is, of course, individual consideration. One of the key transformational relationship traits or leadership traits is the ability to transmit a sense of the larger culture to the individual, giving employees a feeling of ownership in company goals, independence at the workplace. So, transformational leaders would not dictate ideas from a bubble and then leave it to the employees to just carry it out. They are concerned with the professional development of employees and to nurture some kind of positive relationship with them. This involves keeping in lines of communications open, attending to the individual's needs of employees, mentoring, and recognizing that each person is unique and will have unique contributions. The third I speaks of inspirational motivation. Employees would want leaders to impart a vision that is not only appealing but also worthy. So, transformational leaders do that by communicating a vision so well that followers could perhaps not only say, yes, this is something that works, but also internalize it and make the goal of achieving that vision into their own. Starts with giving employees a sense of purpose, a sense of togetherness, setting high standards and expectations for achievement. And the very last I is idealized influence. Transformational leaders serve as role models for employees in every way here. So it includes modeling ethical and socially desirable behavior, maintaining dedication to work towards goals, exhibiting enthusiasm about company strategy. So here it's not just for the good of the organization, but also for the good of the team and the individuals. I think I have spoken quite a bit on leadership. I want for all of us to think of this and now situate this within feminist leadership. Yeah. So, feminist leadership is a concept developed and practiced by many women's movement organizations in the global south. Over the last years, thanks in part to the work of feminist human rights organizations like Kriya in India, it has started its way to make to international social justice sector. Organizations like Action Aid, Oxfam, embracing and implementing feminist leadership as part of their organizational strategy. Now, feminist leadership is at its basic core sense a commitment to creating alternatives to traditional hierarchical leadership and organizational cultures. This can take many forms, from critical self reflection on the individual level to developing new decision making structures on the collective level as well. Most importantly, feminist leadership does not have a fixed definition or step by step guide because it is an ongoing process of learning and unlearning, both individually and together with others. But if I do have to provide one definition from which we can have some takeaways and then perhaps have our own definitions of feminist leadership from that, it could be this definition by Srilata Batliwala, wherein they said, I define feminist leadership as a process of transforming ourselves, our communities, and the larger world to embrace a feminist vision of social justice. It is the process of working to make the feminist vision of a non violent, non discriminatory world a reality. A world where there is equality and respect for the rights of all people, regardless of their gender identity, race, ability, class, caste, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, location. A world where human societies live in a non exploitative, respectful relationship with Mother Earth. Feminist leadership is about mobilizing others around this vision of change to embrace this vision and work towards it together. Feminist leadership embodies four dimensions of feminism. Remember, ideology, analysis, social change, daily practices. It also comprises of guiding processes that seek very fundamental changes in the distribution of power and privilege in society, especially power and privilege that stems from one's gender identity. It goes beyond analysis and strategy to everyday practices. And because of this everyday nature, we need to address our ways of thinking, feeling, bodily sensations. This implies a high level of awareness of the self, of what is going on within us, and not just what is going on in an organization or people outside. This is where I want to introduce all of you to Action Aid's 10 Principles of Feminist Leadership. It's a transformative vision of a just world free from poverty, oppression, and patriarchy, which also says that, hey, we require more transformative feminist leaders. It begins with self awareness. How do we keep ourselves in check, our egos in check, so that we can lead with empathy and open minds? In order to do this, we need to be accepting of our vulnerabilities, recognize and value our strengths. And this can be, of course, done when we think of it as an intersectional perspective. Who am I? What are the privileges I have? What is the kind of power I have? If my community has been historically oppressed, what does it mean for me now? Am I getting compensation or reparations? Because there is a difference between both. From self awareness, we then go on to self care and caring for others. So, to take care of one's emotional and physical well being, in order to also renew our inner sources of, say, inspiration, compassion, so we can continue to give our best, but also encourage and support others to do the same. And how do we do this more actively to ensure there is flexibility, there is support provided in your organizations? One important thing here then becomes dismantling any kind of bias. We need to recognize that societies and others, everyone will tell us that there are certain biases we need to uncover, challenge these forms of discrimination in our day to day work practices and daily life. Can we question these biases? Can we question these stereotypes? Where is this stemming from? Why is it coming here? Do we know that this is not true? And these are some conventional prejudices and stereotypes that have seeped in through our lives. And how do we ensure we make a space for ourselves to unlearn and relearn these? We can do this by inclusion or the different DEI frameworks as well, which speaks of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is where I would like for you to think of it through a more Jessie lens. It is something we adopt at One Future Collective, which speaks of DEI, of course, but through a more gender equity and social inclusion perspective. So, intersectionality, power with, how do we do this? When we say sharing power, how do we say that the ultimate test of leadership is the spaces we create for others to lead? How do we work together for collaboration, to share leadership with all of our community members or with all of our organizational employees? What does this really mean then? A very basic example could be something like, I've been to this conference quite a bit. I've done my networking. I also feel this is something that may interest you. Do you want to go? Something as simple as this. But also implementing it in a way where it's true to the feminist leadership principles and not just a few events for tokenism. This can then lead to responsible and transparent use of power, something we have spoken about, and also accountable collaboration. How do we ensure that we recognize and value successful partnerships while we also address that there are some things that need to change within an organization? So, to measure achievements with the team's success, but also to recognize, okay, if someone requires support, can we address that? Can we have a conversation? Can we look at upskilling? What does it mean for the employee or what does it mean for the community member? Can we provide that support instead of only criticizing? So, partnerships not only as a means of collaboration with different organizations, but also within our own communities or organizations. And this feedback can be very respectful, right? To seek, give, and value constructive feedback, which because it can be an opportunity for two-way learning. It's okay to not always wait for formal reviews. Can we have continuous feedback? Can we have developmental check-ins? Can we ensure that we have the space to have more conversation, to reach out, to feel that yes, I can reach out to someone, and I know that this will be active listening, timely intervention to promote non-violent, respectful communication and behavior. Action 8 then goes on to speak about courage and zero tolerance as well, which is speaking about how any form of discrimination, abuse of power that is witnessed or experienced does not work. So the code of conduct to be, this is a space, a community free from any kind of harassment, exploitation, abuse, and to ensure that we also follow it to the core. There are different strategies to building this transformative and feminist leadership as well. So the analytic framework for transformative and feminist leadership is developed by Shauna Wakefield and based on the practices on transformative feminist and social justice leadership along with primary data research. Some key elements or strategies look like this. The very first being modeling feminist purpose and principles. What does this mean? This means acting on the basis of an explicit set of feminist values and principles with a clear shared language, which serves like an ethical compass for the practice of leadership and forms the basis of value based organizational cultures. So, this would include appreciation of intersectionality and also knowing that the interconnectedness of social justice challenges and solutions is something we want to do together in a feminist way. We can also do this by inspiring shared vision based on personal and collective reflexive learning and unlearning. So, the process is to facilitate development of self awareness among individuals and groups, help them to deal with, say, their own trauma, the harm they have faced, to reflect as individuals and collectives as a part of feminist consciousness raising, and also using power in such a way. This is in line with transformative leadership's individualized consideration part, wherein leaders inspires others to rethink and reimagine the way we do things and to challenge the conventional practices. This is what has been done. What is working? What is not? What needs to change? These definitely are our key learnings, and we need to implement them in a way where it's just and equitable for everyone present here. So, a feminist perspective adds the importance of recognizing these contexts within which individuals are socialized, prejudices that may perpetuate as a result as well. Being able to address this, any kind of discrimination, oppression, marginalization, requires for all of us to also empower and enable others to act. So, building interpersonal relationships and trust among group members based on a belief in a kind of a shared vision and value. So, ensuring that the structures and systems for collective leadership are in place to foster interaction between individuals and teams, and to also know that this includes developing relations across a critical mass of aligned allies to include work for women's rights, queer liberation across organization sectors and movements. How do we do that? Well, we need to begin with challenging patriarchal norms and oppressive power. Surfacing gendered deep structures, so unquestioned ways of working, living, influenced by values, history, norms, practices, to confront them and to also co create more just alternatives. It also requires examining, contesting oppressive expressions of power that feminists may inadvertently say reproduce, especially where patriarchy may be internalized. And one last thing is also to encourage the integration of the heart, mind, body model, supporting the care and well being of individuals and groups that strengthens their ability to stay connected to core feminist values and principles. So, yes, accountability, adaptability, transparency, dismantling hierarchies, for which an example could be perhaps a snowflake model of leadership instead of one hierarchy and then going on to have a more snowflake model of hierarchy in your organization. One important ingredient that often gets lost or not spoken about when we speak of leadership is also love. Here you will hear some learnings from bell hooks and you will see them reflected a lot now. We often associate the idea of love with the idea of intimacy, affection, care. But that understanding is also limited because love is, as Bell Hooks has said, a mix of universe of ingredients like care, recognition, affection, listening, trust, commitment, honesty, open communication, respect, learning justice, and more. There is a polarity when it comes to the usage of love. There are spaces that tend to overuse it, and other spaces that are very skeptical of even acknowledging it remotely. Our society lacks a powerful discourse on love from either political or social spaces. So, Bell Hooks had quoted that this absence of a sustained focus on love arises from a collective failure to acknowledge the needs of the spirit and an overdetermined emphasis on material concerns. Without love, our efforts to liberate ourselves and our world community from oppression, exploitation are doomed. As long as we refuse to address fully the place of love in struggles for liberation, we will not be able to create a culture of conversion where there is mass turning away from an ethic of domination. If it helps, this is how I also quote it at times. We feel anger because there is absence of love. We feel anger because there is prejudice, there is oppression, there is discrimination. And in a world shaped with the principles of patriarchy and authoritarian domination, there is little space for love as a practice of freedom. So, feminist leaders approach love from a space of reclamation to rebuild their idea of expression and freedom. They hold values of love in their congruence with their ideas of empathy, justice, trust, community, equity, power, intersectionality. And this symbiotic exploration shapes the way they lead and engage with the world around them. Again, Bell Hooks has said some practices that feminist leaders action to create more love could be creation of inclusive spaces for expression and redressal of grievances, shaping communities with shared accountability and mutual trust, to be an active listener in a trauma informed manner so as to not re victimize or re traumatize the survivor or victim, to keep it an intersectional space, to make power structures and communication open and transparent, to build a shared vision, to identify problems and name them correctly while finding ways to also address them not only systematically but also systemically. This is what it could mean when we say feminist leadership also speaks about love. It also speaks about empathy. And when it comes to social justice, there are different kinds of justices, right? When we say retributive justice, for example, most Western nations and survivors of colonization and invasive kinds of oppressions would define justice as retributive or punitive. The idea of blaming, punishing the offender or the harm doer is extremely deep rooted in these spaces. So the an eye for an eye mantra of retribution, it's not a warning against it. This is what it is. However, globally this has not been true. This is mainly with Western or colonization. Indigenous people of say North and South Africa and beyond have responded to harm in their communities through restorative practices. Under retributive justice, the focus is that a crime or harm or wrong has been done, and the harm has been caused by this person. So we need to do XYZ, and all the energies get channeled about finding ways to ascribe the crime on the harm doer. So, figuring out if this is the harm that has been caused, what is the punishment we want to give. So, retributive justice will have principles like that those who commit certain kinds of wrongful acts, extremely serious crimes, constitutionally speaking, they will morally deserve to suffer a proportionate punishment. It also speaks about, okay, morally, this is intrinsically good and intrinsically bad. So it's morally impermissible to intentionally punish the innocent or to inflict disproportionately large punishments on the harm doers. This is where I want to introduce alternative forms of justice to all of you. Alternative justice, as the name suggests, refers to alternative forms of responding to any kind of harm or wrong done, either in tandem with the existing criminal justice system with an aim to reform it, or entirely independent from it. Alternative justice is a range of mechanisms aiming at balancing the needs of the survivor, the harm doer, and the community by giving the survivor an active role in the justice process. So, alternative justice deals with the root causes of violence, the aftermath of the harm that was caused, and the implications that can happen in the future by catering to the needs and welfare of the survivors of ultimately achieving justice. It could also encompass initiatives like healing circles. So, transformative justice is a political framework and approach for responding to any kind of abuse, harm, or violence. And at its most basic, it seeks to respond to violence without creating more violence, engaging in harm reduction to lessen violence. So, transformative justice can be thought of as a way of making things right, getting in right relation, or just creating justice together. It will not rely only on the state, which means police systems, prison, the criminal legal system. Although some transformative justice responses do rely on incorporating social services like counseling, it would not reinforce or perpetuate violence like oppressive norms, vigilantism, and to actively cultivate the things we know about violence like healing, accountability, safety for everyone who is included here. State responses to violence reproduce violence and often traumatize those who are exposed to them, especially those who are from oppressed communities who are already targeted by the state. It is important to remember that while many choose to not call the police, many communities can't call police because of different reasons like deportation, harassment, perhaps state sanctioned violence, sexual abuse, previous convictions, or even inaccessibility. Transformative justice was created by and for many of these communities, including indigenous communities, black communities, immigrant communities, for people of color, poor and low income communities, people with disabilities, sex workers, queer and trans communities. It is important to remember that many of the people from these communities have been practicing transformative justice in big and small ways for generations, trying to create safety and reduce harm within the dangerous conditions that they were and are forced to live within. For example, undocumented immigrant women in domestic violence relationships, disabled people who are being abused by their caretakers and attendants, sex workers who experience sexual assault or abuse, or poor children, youth of color who are surviving child sexual abuse, have long been devising ways to reduce harm, to stay alive, to create safety and healing outside of the state systems, whether or not these practices have been explicitly called or labeled as transformative justice. Three core beliefs of transformative justice would be: one, individual justice and collective liberation to be equally important and mutually recognize them. Fundamentally, these both being intertwined, the achievement of one being possible, not really without the other. The conditions that allow violence to occur must be transformed in order to achieve justice in individual instances of violence. So, here, transformative justice is both a liberating politic and an approach for securing justice. Lastly, it speaks about state and systemic responses to violence, including the criminal legal system and child welfare agencies, not only fail to advance individual and collective justice, but also condone and perpetuate these cycles of violence. How do we ensure this does not happen? Transformative justice seeks to provide people who experience violence with immediate safety and long term healing and reparations, while holding people who have done harm or committed violence accountable within and by their communities. So, transformative justice seeks to transform inequity and power abuses within communities through building capacity of communities to increase justice internally, and also seeks to support collective action towards addressing larger issues of injustice and oppression. So, this goes beyond the binary of survivor and offender or perpetrator, who I've been naming as a harm doer. A lot of times, folks will say, okay, if a wrong, a harm has been committed, if this has happened, then why don't we just punish the harm doer? But that does not really give an agency to the survivor. That doesn't also speak about the injustices happening, because there are several things rooted in society that ensured that this happened. So, how do we have a survivor centric approach while also providing some kind of reformation, rehabilitation, while keeping the harm doer accountable? Because the survivor's experiences are valid. And also look at the community. What are some injustices, prejudices, practices in our communities that are ensuring that all of this is happening? I would invite for all of you to really read upon the rape culture. It's a pyramid by 11th consent principle, which speaks about how when we say gender based violence, small things which are normalized, right from sexist jokes to saying boys will be boys, this is how girls are. These normalizations then may lead to degradation, which can often then come up as explicit violence. The rape culture pyramid will have different rungs, but it doesn't always mean it goes from 1 to 10. I would really encourage for all of you to read upon it more. And feel free to reach out, of course, if you want to speak about it more. But the key components of transformative justice, then, when we say feminist leadership, also in social justice, along with it being more survivor centric, it also becomes trauma informed and survivor focused healing. It is the first and foremost essential component to recognize that transformative justice practices need to support survivors by reinforcing their autonomy and their self sufficiency with trauma informed care. Survivors must be provided with options to decide on what can help them feel safe, what can help them feel this is what healing means for me, or what justice means for me. Justice in itself has a lot of phys- uh, psychological and also philosophical, to be honest, lenses. But justice looks so different. What justice looks like to me may be different from what it looks like to you. Maybe an apology works. Maybe an apology with an accountability works. Maybe constitutional legal justice is what I want to do. And all of this is valid, right? Because it is the survivor who should get to decide what kind of justice they need to integrate healing in it as well. This is also where I want to speak a little bit of community accountability and collective action. So, in order to bring long term social change, shift the culture, transform the way we respond to sexual and domestic violence. Communities could start closely examining and addressing individual and societal root causes that have led to these violent and oppressive environments for marginalized communities. So, this component would not only reinforce communities to work together, but also foster partnership, collaboration to provide a safer, supportive space, but also encourage collective action to change risk factors leading to these abusive or violent behaviors. Please note, when I say communities, I do not want to put the onus only on small communities. Communities could also mean your state. What are the policies that are coming in? What is the role of a civil society organization? What is the role of citizens here? While also keeping in mind that there are different dynamics of power, privilege, gender, hierarchy that come into play. Then who are we putting the onus on here? And who should we be putting it on? Can we also recognize the cultural differences? Communities working towards preventing and ending sexual and domestic violence, interested in transformative justice practices, also will need to acknowledge that there are cultural differences which may have to be adapted and modified in order to be more effective and sustainable. Then, what does this look like? If you want to read more on this, this is from generation5.org, and it would be really interesting to also look at Generation 5's goals of transformative justice as response to child sexual abuse. Speaking of all of this, if I have to summarize, what are the goals of transformative justice then? Taking again from Generation 5's model, I would say survivor safety, healing and agency. If I am the survivor, can I get the agency and autonomy to decide what justice looks like for me and what I want to do about it without being reprimanded, without being re victimized and re traumatized? Can I get that space for myself? Can I have those kinds of support systems? When I say support systems, I don't only mean, say, family or relatives, but also the state. What does it mean for the state to be trauma informed? To have trauma informed practices right from courts to lawyers to polices to all stakeholders included in the process for justice. Can we also have some kind of accountability and transformation for the harm doer? Remember, we spoke of retributive justice, and feminist leadership does say that when we say justice, it should be survivor centric. But at the same time, what are we doing about the harm that has been caused by the harm doer or the society that perpetuated notions which led to this? So, for the harm doer, can there also be some kind of accountability framework beyond perhaps the legal system? And also to ensure there is some form of reformation and rehabilitation in the harm doer, while remembering that the survivors' experiences are valid and to also believe survivors. How can we have a more community response and community accountability here? Can we have more gender just practices, trauma informed practices? Can we dismantle patriarchy, smash it off, dismantle hierarchy, and then try to see what society looks like? Now, when I say this, it does feel a little more ideal, right? But the truth also is that many indigenous communities, many small communities who were colonized or who are not from the West, have been practicing this for quite a bit. Can we try to do this in our organizations then? Instead of having a very rigid hierarchy when we spoke of leadership and different kinds of leaderships, can we try to make that more feminist? Can we have accountability for everyone in the team? Can we have space for communication, transparency, and also offering support in our teams? It could be small things like, I don't know how to do XYZ. Can you tell me how you've done it before? Can you mentor me for it? Can we have coaching as a means of leadership practice? Can we try to do all of this in our organizations? Because this is how transformation of our communities and social conditions would create more space for safety and not perpetuate any kind of violence, harm, or abuse. This is what feminist leadership looks at. Feminist leadership speaks about accountability, it speaks about agency, it speaks about autonomy. It ensures that there is space for everyone, wherein we also challenge the existing status quos. Feminist leadership is also not one definition, it is an ongoing process. It is a relearning, unlearning process which will go on till we achieve the kind of equity that ensures that no community or member faces any kind of oppression. I would like to conclude by saying a lot of times when we say feminist leadership, theories and in general, folks may tend to focus on, okay, feminist leadership within workspaces. But we also spoke of feminist leadership within different kinds of spaces like personal, not only professional but also public. What does it mean for me to integrate love and healing in my practice every day, in my relations every day? How do I do that? It may not be easy because I also want to recognize that conventionally there are traditional notions in society that will not only practice and perpetuate but will yell for you to follow certain sets of norms. You need to be in the gender binary. It should be power over. If I am a parent, I have power over you. If I am a teacher, I have some kind of authority over you. If I live in a metropolitan city, I will automatically have more privileges than someone who stays in, say, a rural area. So, how do we get that vision? How do we build partnerships and collaborations in a way that our shared visions also have value alignment? There are some 305 folks here. I would like to end with one reflection question for all of you. I know we're ending a little early, which also means we may have time for questions and answers. But when I say feminist leadership, map out what are the things you think that do not work in feminist leadership right now. If you have seen a model of feminist leadership somewhere or from this talk, then map out, okay, what is definitely happening and helping as well. How do I go from A to B? This new definition, you mapping this out, is a self reflection you're having and perhaps can be integrated in your community and society at large. All of your voices matter, and that is what feminist politics talks about. To include everyone, especially those who have been historically marginalized, and to also acknowledge our privilege and pass the mic as needed. That's all from me today, folks. Thank you so much. I am Shreya from One Future Collective. If you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us on info@onefuturecollective.org. You can follow us on our social media channels, and very happy to be here again. Alisha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shreya. And I knew that when we were supposed to go ahead with this topic, this would be extremely, extremely insightful. And yes, like I told you before starting, that I will definitely have a lot of things to say about. So I do have a few things. So just some key highlights or key takeaways that have struck me, and I am sure I am going to think about all of these a lot. Love is so important, compassionate collaboration is so important. You we cannot function in the society, in workplaces or in personal spaces without compassion, without love, which is one of the major parts of the feminist leadership and justice you were speaking about. And the kind of examples you gave and the theories you mentioned, we actually see them a lot in day to day lives, like in workplaces or in personal spaces we do see them. And nobody tells us that the feelings that you are experiencing are completely valid because you're not alone. Then, and like you mentioned, these have actually been theorized. I We cannot, this is not just something that is only happening to me, this has happened to so many people. And which is why we would need to look at solutions to these. We just cannot let them slide away thinking that this is probably a one time thing which is just happening with me. but we need to think about solutions to these, or maybe um, uh, practices. And I was coming to that, that the kind of things that you were mentioning, uh, this needs a very regular practice. I mean, this cannot be a one time solution to a problem. This will need to be a process, this will need to be a practice that gets developed by people and then sort of gets integrated into the community spaces or workplaces. So uh, that is something I realized from this. And uh, I mean, I have a lot of things to say right now, but I am being extremely inarticulate, I'm sure. But uh,
What you're saying has a lot of merit.
thank
Trust
you.
me.
And uh, I mean, so many things it would seem like an unnecessary rant, but then so many things that you spoke about, the kind of hierarchies being followed in the society, in workplaces, and sort of dismissals happening along with those, not giving space for feedback and growth, just sort of a lot of impositions that happen in workplaces are, these are very deep rooted, and these require a lot of I mean, change through a very systemic practice. So yes, I am being inarticulate, but I think I am. My mind is in the right track. So Shreya has also mentioned a lot of recommendations that I was listening to. She's asked us to sort of go back and read a few things that she was using through the session. I would request Shreya to share those resources with me, because this session is getting recorded, and personally I would want to go back and read them in my time. And when we release this recording to other people, we could probably mention these resources that you have mentioned, so that yes, everybody can take a look at this. I think we do have a question. Somebody's asked, talking of marginalized community, which strategy can we implement to empower feminist gender, considering they are playing a major role in provision and safeguarding resources? This is the question, Shreya. Would you like to answer this? I think.
I think it
Water
says water
resources. Yeah.
resources specifically. Right. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Hilary. This reminds me of how we have something called as conversation cards, which is like a gamified version of facilitation, a tool to ensure we can speak of, say, inequity and climate change in a gamified way. So you take a card, you keep it. It has a question like one you have mentioned. How can we have more feminist strategies when we speak of water resources or climate change? And then everyone just shares on it. Happy to share resources on this with you, Alisha, and perhaps you can forward it. But when we try to think of this year again, I want us to go back to the expressions of power. Are we working with a community, or do we have power over them already? Do we want to change that dynamic? When it comes to gender, a lot of times ecofeminism will speak about how nature is connected to femininity. So, saying Mother Nature, Mother Earth, which also puts a lot of onus on the female characteristics of being nurturing, being always calming, being always caring. Then, do we also want to dismantle those in the first place and have a more gender just equation there? Do we want to empower marginalized communities in a way wherein we think we already have some kind of privilege and I want to support? Or am I someone from the community and the equation here is power with? We all have it, and then how do we go ahead from there? So I would like to ask these questions first, and then perhaps we have a round of reflection and then go ahead. Because even words like empowering versus supporting versus being a better ally, all of these have different connotations. So, what is it that we do want to look at here? Just some reflection questions. Of course, happy to speak about this more. You can reach out to me via an email ID, which I can share with Alisha, and we can speak more. But yeah, I hope that answers your question for now.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the wonderful response. I think Hilary is impressed because we get a this reaction from them. Thank you so much. And I think, yes, Shreya, we will definitely reach out to you for more questions, because I will take some, at least me personally, I will take some time to soak this all in. And definitely, there are a lot of reflections suggested by you. So a lot to think about. And then yes, this is not a one time conversation, like Shreya said. This is an ongoing process. So we'll keep having more questions, we'll keep developing the feminist leadership, and everybody will have their own versions of it. But we should just make sure there's love, there's compassion, and there's an intent to be a better ally with the people that we are working with. So I think I'll conclude the session now. Thank you so much, Shreya, for being a part of this. I'm extremely grateful. Thank you for the last minute changes that you accommodated. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think my attention span is not really bad, because I used to think it is bad, but I did listen to such an important discussion by you. And yes, so maybe if we do talk about these things on a regular basis, maybe we can understand that at least attention span wise, I'm not doing very bad. And this is something which interests me, and this should be a regular conversation, and that is why we've extended this conversation on this summit. And yes, hoping more
Mhm.
conversations. I'll end the session with the outro video that we have. And
If I
please do,
can
please
just
do.
add one thing before we end. Um, Firstly, I think you're articulating well. It's just there are a lot of things which I spoke of, so it's okay to have time for reflection. If we say feminist leadership for all our listeners, it also means not having, if we have accountability, not only moving to hyper accountability, also saying this not only because it's been theorized, but it's also something that always comes as an onus on feminist or social purpose organizations, right? Because I'm doing this kind of work, I need to have all accountability, which also means it may turn into hyper accountability, which also means then it can lead to burnout, it can lead to a lot of fatigue. So, what does that mean for us if we truly want to be a feminist leader or have social purpose organizations wherein we don't burn ourselves out as civil society organizations and also take care of ourselves? Just wanted to highlight that. Thank you so much. Feel
Absolutely,
free to go on.
absolutely.